Shalom, Prasha Ki Tetse contains more mitzvot than any other parsha. And if you try and think about all the 70 plus mitzvot in this parsha, is there one unifying theme that they have? Well, one of the commentaries says it's the irreducible dignity of all human beings. Now, that in a situation where there's nothing that costs you is easy. But what happens when there are challenges to you in trying to meet the needs of other people? That's when it really comes into play. So let's talk about the way in which things that come at us in our life challenge our ability to understand and practice and live out the irreducible dignity of other human beings. First of all, let's say you have a murderer who commits a heinous crime and you want to take revenge. Well, the Torah says that that person who is hanged because of his terrible crime, you have to have respect and dignity for that body too, and you have to bury that body. I can't let it stay overnight. So even in the case where you hate and despise this person as a society, you have to have dignity for the body. And that teaches us in Judaism the larger principle of having dignity for all dead bodies. It's hopefully that we'll have dignity for live bodies. So we don't like to embalm, we don't like to cremate, we don't like to accelerate or delay the natural return of the body. We don't have open caskets. We don't like autopsies because we want to have respect for the dead body derived from that idea. So when it's tough for you and you really hate that person, you still have to have respect for the body even though that person can no longer live among society. Second of all, what happens if you have enemies? We do have real enemies. We have people that want to really hurt and destroy the Jewish people, and there are other people that have enemies too. For example, today, we read this week about how Sweden had an article published, this despicable and disgusting lie told for thousands of years about the blood libel. This time it was the Palestinians, another lie saying that Jewish Israeli soldiers were using body parts of Palestinians. Just disgusting, filthy lies. Sweden wouldn't renounce it. The Prime Minister admitted there was no evidence for it, complete lies. We have enemies, or the lie told by the Palestinian Authority this week that Jews have no tie to Jerusalem. We have the oldest tie. Jerusalem's mentioned 687 times in the Hebrew Bible, not once in the Quran, and Jews have no ties to Jerusalem. What another complete lie. Yes, we have enemies, but the Torah says it begins and ends with the way in which enemies have to be treated too with dignity. In the sense that the Torah opens up with how in most societies when you invaded a country, the men just ravished the women and did whatever they wanted, horrible. And Torah says specifically, no, that if the woman has rights and dignity, it has to be treated with respect. Of course, you have to fight when it's necessary. You have to fight in a dignified way. Not like Amalek, the horrible nation described at the end of the Torah portion, which attacked the men and the women and children from the rear. You have to fight. If you're going to fight, you have to fight with your soldiers and fight in a dignified way. But what happens also when it's easy to have irreducible dignity of human beings, but what happens when it conflicts with your profit? For example, the Torah has many laws in this parsha dealing with how you have to help the poor. You can't cheat the poor. If a laborer works, you have to pay him that day. If he needs a pledge, you can't take the basic way, the tools in which he makes a living, like a millstone in this case, as a pledge. You have to treat the workers with dignity, even if it affects your bottom line. And then about animals. You might say animals can be exploited for purposes of helping you do your crops or whatever. No, the Torah says specifically you can't muzzle the ox. You have to treat animals with dignity, even though it may hurt your bottom line. And in terms of environmentalism, it might be easier just to pollute. And who cares about the cost? Well, the Torah says in the case in this portion that you have to have a spade and cover up your excrement, and that God walks through the camp. You have to have a safe environment in a camp because God walks through it, proverbially speaking, metaphorically speaking. And so we have here these examples. The Torah is saying that it's easy in the case again where you have nothing to lose to treat other people with dignity, but when it affects you economically or some other way, that's the test. The Torah says in those cases especially you have to remember you can't mistreat the orphan, the widow, the stranger, the poor, the animals, the laborers, the people, or the environment itself. And finally, Rashi has a very interesting commentary on the very first verse, which talks about how when you go out to war against your enemies, he says one of the main enemies we have is ourselves. And it's interesting that this Torah portion is read in the month of Elul before Rosh Hashanah, when we have to prepare spiritually for the self-evaluation. So Rashi says that one of the enemy of ourself is when we throw off the constraints of the Torah and go after our primal urges. That we have to treat ourselves with dignity, ourselves with the understanding that we have irreducible human dignity, and we have to control that. And so we have in these examples of the murderer, of our enemies, of the people that are poor and needy, and ourselves, that we have to always remember the values of the Parsha with the most mitzvot of any, the irreducible dignity of all human beings. Shalom.